Hi, today we're going to talk about a teaching technique that many faculty use, yet a lot of faculty don't always have the best things to say about it. And we'll talk about some of those reasons as we go through this video. What we're talking about, of course, is the lecture. Now, the lecture gets a very bad reputation in higher education, yet if you go into any classroom across the country at a college or even high schools, what you tend to see are faculty lecturing. The lecture has a long history. And the reason lecturing was originally started was to convey information to large numbers of people in a way that was convenient and a way that made the most sense for delivering that information. At the time the lecture was originally started, people didn't have quite as much access to all the reading materials, so the lecture was designed to condense information, provide some interpretation of the information, and then deliver it to the students. Now, lecturing has evolved in many ways over the years, and what most faculty say is they don't just lecture, but they engage in something like a lecture discussion. The idea being that the lecture is not just the faculty member talking, it's an engaged process between the students and the faculty member. And in many cases, that's what you see. But what I want to talk about today are some of the best practices that are involved in lecturing so that when you are engaged in this process, when faculty are inevitably engaged in some form of content delivery, they think about what it means to lecture, they think about what it means for students to learn, and they tailor what they do in their class to best meet the needs of the students. Now, much of what I'm going to talk about comes from and is drawn extensively from a book that was recently put out by two colleagues of mine, Christine Harrington and Todd Zakrychek. The book's called Dynamic Lecturing. And so I'm drawing from that book and trying to sort of encapsulate some of that information in this discussion. Now, one of the most important things to understand when you engage in lecturing is that students come to class with some prior knowledge of a variety of different things. One of which is they know about what classroom context is supposed to look like. The idea is students think, I come to class, I sit down, the faculty member talks, I write down some notes, and then I leave. After a number of those, I take a test, and I show the faculty member I listened to what they had to say, and I'm able to repeat back to the faculty member what they said. Now, this prior knowledge of the classroom environment is often mistaken by students when they get to college, because faculty don't always do it quite like that. I would argue that that prior knowledge about what class is like should be shattered when students come to college, because faculty at college, at university level teaching, ought to be understanding the best practices. Now, what are some of these best practices? One of the things to really understand is that students need scaffolding. Now, this notion of scaffolding in a lecture means students can't come into a class and be lectured to by a faculty member unless the students have some idea of the content. They need to have some idea, and the lecture is designed to build up on that idea. Now, the scaffolding process means you want to draw on what students know about the content. You want to use that content knowledge that they have from previous classes, from what you've taught them, previous classes they've taken in other contexts, and build upon that prior knowledge, build upon that by scaffolding up. Now, the idea is you start where they are and you give them a little bit of information that goes just beyond that. Now, once they master that material, then you give them a little bit more information. And then you give them a little bit more. Now, how do you know that the students have mastered that content? That's where the lecture can become more of a dynamic lecture, as the book title indicates. What you can do is have students engage in retrieval. That is, have the students remember, recall, in some active way, the content that they've been taught before. You can do that through quizzing. You can do that through giving them worksheets where they respond to questions. You can give that to them by having them discuss in small groups. You can do that by having a short question and answer period. Some faculty like to do it with response software. But get students to retrieve what they've already heard, what they've already learned. Now, once they've retrieved it, you want them to reflect on not just the content that they already know, but how the new content fits with what they already know. In some cases, when students retrieve prior knowledge and they try to connect it up to what the lecturer is saying. If it doesn't make sense, this reflection period is an opportunity for students to try to figure out how that content fits together and then try to come to some consensus about how what they previously thought might not be an accurate reflection of what they now know. Students need to recognize that learning is a long process in which anytime they learn something, they are using what they previously learned to interpret it. That reflection time, that reflection piece during any kind of lecturing situation allows them to take a moment, pause, and think about how things fit together. And this reflection, I can really make this clear. Give students time to think. Give them time to think by being silent for a minute. Give them time to think by having them write down their thoughts, but give them time to reflect. Now, one other thing to do during lecturing that is very, very effective is to constantly check to make sure that students are able to expand. And that is, you want students to be able to take what they've learned and expand beyond what they've said, what you've said in the classroom. You want students to be able to generalize, take that content and see how it fits in other contexts. Take that content and see how they can relate it to other things they've learned, maybe in different classes or in different experiences. This process of expansion, also called elaboration, is one where students are then able to take that material and really try to integrate it into what they already know. This kind of process with the reflection allows for a much deeper learning experience. Now, the lecture discussion I started with encompasses many of these processes. What we want to be able to do is provide students with a dynamic classroom, an engaged classroom, so that no matter what's happening in the classroom, students are constantly doing some of these internal cognitive activities. Now, as a faculty member, all you can control is what you do. But keeping in mind what students need to do to learn effectively will allow you to adjust your activities, your approach, your delivery of the content in such a way that even if you're lecturing, you're giving students time to engage in the cognitive processes that we have developed really extensive knowledge about that we know leads to better learning. Thanks.